next on Life Focus.
Naked came I from my mother's womb, and naked will I return.
For a whole year, A.J. Jacobs lived biblically.
I had to spend a year not lying, not coveting, not gossiping, and I live in New York City, and I work as a journalist. So that's pretty much my entire life right there.
And for a whole year, Reverend Ed Dobson really followed Jesus Christ.
I decided to live more Jewishly, which meant eating kosher, observing the Sabbath, going to the synagogue, observing feasts and festivals.
Discover the difference between living by the rules.
I started the whole thing by writing down every single rule that I could find in the Bible.
And walking by faith.
I would get up every morning focused on trying to live like Jesus, instead of getting up every morning and wondering which muscle doesn't work that worked yesterday.
Living by the book on this edition of Life Focus.
Hello everyone, welcome to Life Focus. I'm Dan Meyer. What if a modern day man decided to follow the Bible literally? Not just the basic rules like thou shalt not kill or steal, but the obscure ones we don't often hear about, such as eating kosher or not wearing clothing made with mixed fibers. It's an experiment that two men, one a conservative Christian and the other a confirmed agnostic, decided to try. While their sometimes humorous, sometimes serious journeys were remarkably similar, their year-long quest following the Bible led them to completely different places.
Well, I came up with the idea to live biblically because I grew up with no religion at all.
New York City journalist A.J. Jacobs found no relevance in the Bible for the 20th century.
How can smart people believe this? It's like believing in the tooth fairy.
I think almost all my life I've tried to follow Jesus.
Reverend Ed Dobson of Grand Rapids, Michigan, lived by the book.
But I've always followed him within the constraints of a religious school, a religious denomination, or a church.
Inspired by A.J.'s best-selling book, The Year of Living Biblically, Ed decided he would follow Jesus' teachings for a whole year.
I think what I was trying to do for the first time was try to eliminate all of the religious, theological, denominational constraints and go back to what Jesus said.
A.J. counted 700 biblical laws he needed to follow, including the obvious Golden Rule and the 10 Commandments.
Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. But there are also these dozens of other rules that I never heard of, like that you cannot wear clothes made of mixed fibers. And I thought, well, why would God care? But I thought I would never know if they have any meaning or affect my life in a good way unless I try them.
I quit listening to Pink Floyd, Dropkick Murphy, U2, the Rolling Stones, all my favorite bands, and focused for a whole year just on listening to the Gospels.
Diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, Ed listened rather than read the 4 books in the Bible that document Jesus' life and teachings.
I found it to be really powerful. I felt at times like I was caught up in the story, that I was really standing there listening to Jesus, that in a small way I was identifying with his suffering.
Living from the Bible changed every aspect of their lives. But could two men adjust the way they walk, talk, and think without going completely crazy?
Even in New York, a guy looking like Moses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. People cross the street to avoid you or give you money.
I thought maybe like A.J. Jacobs, I'd wear me a robe and carry a staff But because the middle of winter, it gets kind of cold, and a robe and sandals would not be good.
In Leviticus, it says you cannot shave the corners of your beard. And I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow.
I walk along the pier carrying a Bible, and I throw these breadcrumbs out on the water. And these fishermen are looking at me like, what a complete stupid idiot.
I herded sheep in Israel.
I ate kosher, which is a pain in the neck.
I got every beer joke in the world, a ZZ Top, Abraham Lincoln. People called me the Unabomber.
I observed the Sabbath, which is a pain in the neck.
So it was a physical transformation as well as this internal and spiritual transformation.
As their beards grew longer, their wives' patience grew shorter.
Never liked facial hair on any of my significant others.
The traditions and rules were sometimes hard for Julie Jacobs to understand.
And if you follow Leviticus really strictly, you cannot sit on a seat where a woman in her time of month has sat.
The impurity of it implied that there was something wrong with me.
And she found this offensive, so she sat in every seat in our apartment during my years. I had to buy my own seat to carry around, a little portable chair, my island of purity. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman.
Behind the rigorous rules and sometimes humorous regulations lies a humble quest for something more.
I went into this project with deep curiosity and earnestness, and I really wanted to learn about religion and see how it would affect my life.
Ed wanted to see how living like Jesus would affect his numbered days.
It's not just a path to heaven. It's not just about what you believe. It's about how you live that out in a practical way.
The twitches in Ed Dobson's muscles constantly remind him of his illness. Diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, Ed grows weaker every day. Once a strong athlete and a powerful national leader, he now lives a vulnerable life, becoming more dependent on others around him.
I'm not afraid of being dead, but I am afraid of getting dead.
But this pastor will never forget the first time he noticed something wrong with his body.
One day I was writing out my sermon notes, and it felt like my brain and my hand were not quite connected.
His brain was telling his hand something to do, which I think had he told me that at the moment, I would have thought he was having a stroke. But obviously that he didn't have other symptoms that way.
Good to see you, man.
Over the next few weeks, Dr. Eugene Wiley confirmed his suspicions. His pastor, now his patient, had ALS, a motor neuron disease where the nerve cells in the central nervous system slowly die.
Getting dressed in the winter wears me out.
The nerves dying lead to progressive weakness to the muscles they supply, including the hands, legs, and vocal cords.
The time course in typical ALS is 1 to 3 years. However, there are many folks who have symptoms much longer, up to 15 to 20 years or more.
I remember walking out, the sun was shining. It was a beautiful fall afternoon, and I thought, my life is over.
Edward George Dobson grew up in Belfast, Northern Ireland. His family emigrated to America, where he attended Bob Jones University.
He was a good athlete, a very good soccer player, of course, coming from Ireland. He was just easy to like. We talked and talked and talked and talked for months and really became friends as we fell in love.
2 days after graduation, Ed and Lorna tied the knot and moved to the Hollers of Virginia. There, they had 3 children, and soon he met another passionate pastor, one who wanted to change America's political climate.
I appreciate all that I learned from you and find that every day I'm using things I saw you do and say.
I fell in love with Jerry Falwell and spent 14 and a half years. I was the associate minister at the church, on the board of the moral majority, the vice president of the university.
Falwell took Dobson under his conservative right wing. Together, they founded the Moral Majority, a political movement that fueled the religious right of conservative politics.
There seems to me to be a lot of confusion in the whole area of religion and politics and where the balance is.
I had been in the forefront of politics, political engagement, and I decided to go all the way to the other extreme.
From Grand Rapids, Michigan, it's the teaching ministry of Dr. Ed Dobson.
When Ed left Falwell to pastor this church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he surprised his followers, claiming that the religious right was sometimes wrong.
God will raise up His church, not the formal, political church. His church, where Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female, have been all made to drink of the same Spirit.
He had came around to a different position, that society had to be changed from inside out, one person at a time, and that his job was to preach the gospel, not to tell people what to think politically.
His flip-flop views shocked his followers and made the headlines.
So what happened nationally was fundamentally irrelevant to me.
You can't predict necessarily what Ed will say.
And you can't predict what Ed will do. When he lived his Jesus year, Ed found himself walking into the most unlikely places.
Cheers. I grew up in the kind of environment where you would never go to the bar, and you would certainly never party with pagans and sinners. And so I began taking steps to do just that, and tried to literally obey them, which got me into all sorts of trouble.
This pastor found sinners not sitting on a pew at his church, but drinking at a bar in his neighborhood.
They're not interested in the Jesus of the church. They're not interested in the Jesus of the Crusades. They're not interested in the Jesus of the Inquisition. But they are interested in the real historical Jesus. And that's kind of what inspired me. Unfortunately, we have added so many layers to Jesus that the real Jesus seldom is communicated.
From the bars to the polls, this Jesus follower once again brought controversy to a national level.
Jesus was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard.
Right. And you voted for Barack Obama.
I did indeed. I'm not exactly sure how I ended up in Good Morning America, other than I suspect because I voted for Obama.
One thing I thought was very brave of Pastor Dobson was when he said that he voted for Obama, because I know he received flack for that.
Criticism from his faithful made him the perfect candidate for the media.
And my first vote for a Democrat.
Which brought some scorn, I imagine, from your community, Christian community there.
Yeah.
I'm a Jewish guy from New York, so when I say I voted for Obama, no one's surprised. But he's an evangelical Christian, so it is a little bit surprising.
I was sitting on the set laughing inside. I'm thinking, this is the ultimate joke, that I've tried to live like Jesus, and now I'm on Good Morning America? Get a life.
The life he discovered differed by far from the religious habits he once held, a journey he documents in his own book, The Year of Living Like Jesus.
When I started this journey, number one, I never intended to write a book. Number two, I never intended to be interviewed.
And he never intended to disappoint those who supported him, many who believed that during his year of living like Jesus, Edward George Dobson lost his soul.
I think if Dr. Falwell had been alive, he would have called me up and said, Edward, were you stone drunk or out of your mind? And I would have said, well, I'm not stone drunk, but maybe I am out of my mind. I've begun a list of all the people I may have offended.
Years earlier, Ed did something else he thought he would never do.
My prayer, and I hope your prayer for me, will be that it will stay in one limb, or that God will choose to reverse the process.
But then when the ALS really started to take its toll on him, he had to retire from Calvary.
4 years later, well past doctors' predictions, Ed made a video announcement that he had to step down.
I just felt that I ought to tell you, honestly and forthrightly, that I feel the need of entering into this period of transition.
I think the struggle to step down and away from being the pastor of a large congregation was devastating for him, and it was for us.
He loved preaching, he wanted to keep preaching, but he just couldn't, and he just had to accept it.
I think what those of us who have been close to Ed have learned is that as we saw him broken in so many ways by this disease that was slowly sapping his strength, we saw a chapter of his life coming to an end.
Those who know Ed Dobson the best would tell you that he's a man that follows his beliefs. Nominated Pastor of the Year by Moody Bible Institute, his personality drives him to expect the best of himself and of everyone around him. And when he sets out to start a project, he will follow it through to its ultimate end, no matter where that may lead him.
I was only 50 years old. I was entering the time in my life where my ministry could be most effective and most powerful. And now I'm being told I have 2 to 5 years to live, most of it in a disabled condition.
Shocked by Ed's diagnosis, the Dobson family grieved.
Just the uncertainty of the disease and the fact that it does take most people very quickly. And so it was very scary for us at the time.
I kind of wanted to crawl up in a fetal position and just cry until I couldn't cry anymore.
Those who love Ed learn to deal with losses.
Well, it'll be good to have you around for the summer.
Yeah.
And it's been really hard over the years to watch him just slowly lose weight, lose strength in his hands. It's been most obvious in his hands, his dexterity, the weakness in his arms.
A voice-activated computer helps him overcome the loss of agility in his fingers.
As he loses strength, that's an ongoing journey. And I try not to live too far in the future.
I realized I could choose to live, or I could choose to give up and die. And I remember sitting there saying, I'm going to live, just a day at a time. That would not be deep south.
You know, as my dad has said over and over, you can't become absorbed by this disease or, you know, whatever trauma you're going through, because then it just takes control of you, and you can't do that.
So how often did you break the rules?
Actually, quite often. I'm serious. I try not to think about the future. I know what I can do today, and I'm very grateful for it. And I could get run over by a car tomorrow. In fact, they told me at the University of Michigan that statistically I'm more likely to get run over by a bus than die of ALS. So I'm avoiding buses at all costs.
Added to the laughter, Lauren and Ed make a conscious effort to be grateful, even for the little things.
Like dressing yourself, eating, taking a shower, putting on your clothes, putting on your shoes, tying your shoes, all of the little things that everyone takes for granted. Thank you, dear.
You're welcome. We're very thankful that he has a great appetite. Because we changed the way we eat, he's much healthier than he used to be. He's not sick in bed. He doesn't get colds or flu.
Yeah, this is very Middle Eastern.
Facing a fatal diagnosis may be the hardest task anyone can tackle. But Ed learned following Jesus is even more difficult.
It's impossible to live up to Jesus' standard. And after all, he was God, so he had a slight advantage.
I mean, one of the lessons I learned is you cannot follow all these rules. I mean, there are so many, and it's so hard. But I found it to be a fascinating experience to try. And I think it did make me a better person, even though I failed completely.
He may have failed at perfection, but AJ succeeded in a newfound understanding of faith.
Because I don't know it. Are you my husband? It's like, are you my mother?
I still am an agnostic, but a very different kind of agnostic, a reverent agnostic who believes in this idea of sacredness.
Ed would say he grew into a different kind of Christian. Now, he doesn't ask God for anything.
I'm not asking God to heal me. I'm throwing myself on the mercy of God.
At the mercy of someone who understands.
I could be frustrated with the limitations of my body. And then I remember Jesus also lived with significant limitations, far beyond my own. So in that way, the fact that he's with me, he understands the limitations of living in human flesh. And I find that very comforting.
Ed also finds comfort in the Jewish traditions he adhered to for a year.
For example, the day before Rosh Hashanah, Jews honor all of the people who've been buried. And I stood there at the grave, and I asked my mom to forgive me and wished she could have cooked one more time. And then my dad, who passed away a couple of years ago, and as I stood there, I wanted him to call one more time.
Remembering the wisdom of those who left Earth before him, Ed finds comfort in what's to come.
My dad would say the three most important words in the Bible about heaven are better by far. So he put it on my mother's grave and now his grave as well. Better by far. There is heaven. There is a place of shalom. There's a new heaven and a new earth with no more pain, suffering, dying, or death. Absolutely.
Ed Dobson and A.J. Jacobs have documented their journeys in best-selling books. While living from the Scriptures did not change their core beliefs, they would tell you that following the biblical rules did help them become better people. Today, Ed Dobson continues his journey, which he says is the most powerful force in helping him to deal with Lou Gehrig's disease. Well, that's all for today's Life Focus. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dan Meyer, and I'll see you again next time.
I would say the one thing in Jesus' teaching that brings me great comfort is he said, I am with you always to the very end of the age. That the Jesus that I met as an 11-year-old boy in Ireland, the Jesus I have walked with all of these years, and the Jesus I discovered this last year living like him, is the same Jesus who will walk with me to the end. So I find great comfort in that.
More information about this program can be found online at www.lifefocus.tv. Pricing and ordering information for a DVD copy of this program are available on our website or by phone at 1-877-908-5433. The title of today's program is on the screen.